24, Part 1, Chapter 5, continued, of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tchernoff was not a patriot. Many a time Argensola had heard him railing against his country, but now he was indignant in view of the contempt with which Teutonic haughtiness was treating the Russian nation. Where, in the last 40 years of imperial grandeur, was that universal supremacy of which the Germans were everlastingly boasting? Excellent workers in science, tenacious and short-sighted academicians, each wrapped in his specialty, Benedictines of the laboratory, who experimented painstakingly and occasionally hit upon something, in spite of enormous blunders, given out as truths because they were their own, that was all. And side by side with such patient laboriosity, really worthy of respect, what charlatanism! What great names exploited as a shop sample! How many sages turned into proprietors of sanatoriums! A Herr Professor discovers the cure of tuberculosis, and the tubercular keep on dying as before. Another labels with a number the invincible remedy for the most unconfessable of diseases, and the genital scourge continues afflicting the world. And all these errors were representing great fortunes, each saving panacea bringing into existence an industrial corporation selling its products at high prices, as though suffering were a privilege of the rich. How different from the bluff Pasteur and other clever men of the inferior races who have given their discoveries to the world without stooping to form monopolies. "German science," continued Tchernoff, "has given much to humanity, I admit that. But the science of other nations has done as much. Only a nation puffed up with conceit could imagine that it has done everything for civilization, and the others nothing. Apart from their learned specialists, what genius has been produced in our day by this Germany, which believes itself so transcendent? Wagner, the last of the romanticists, closes an epoch and belongs to the past. Nietzsche took pains to proclaim his Polish origin and abominated Germany, a country, according to him, of middle-class pedants. His Slavism was so pronounced that he even prophesied the overthrow of the Prussians by the Slavs. And there are others. We, although a savage people, have given the world of modern times an admirable moral grandeur. Tolstoy and Dostoevsky are world geniuses. What names can the Germany of William II put ahead of these? His country was the country of music, but the Russian musicians of today are more original than the mere followers of Wagner, the copyists who take refuge in orchestral exasperations in order to hide their mediocrity. In its time of stress, the German nation had men of genius before pan-Germanism had been born, when the empire did not exist. Goethe, Schiller, Beethoven were subjects of little principalities. They received influence from other countries and contributed their share to the universal civilization, like citizens of the world, without insisting that the world should therefore become Germanized. Tsarism had committed atrocities. Tchernoff knew that by experience and did not need the Germans to assure him of it. But all the illustrious classes of Russia were enemies of that tyranny and were protesting against it. Where in Germany were the intellectual enemies of Prussian Tsarism? They were either holding their peace or breaking forth into adulation of the anointed of the Lord, a musician and comedian like Nero, of a sharp and superficial intelligence, who believed that by merely skimming through anything, he knew it all. Eager to strike a spectacular pose in history, he had finally afflicted the world with the greatest of calamities. Why must the tyranny that weighs upon my country necessarily be Russian? The worst czars were imitators of Prussia. Every time that the Russian people of our day have attempted to revindicate their rights, the reactionaries have used the Kaiser as a threat, proclaiming that he would come to their aid. One half of the Russian aristocracy is German. German. The functionaries who advise and support despotism are Germans. German, too, are the generals who have distinguished themselves by massacring the people. German are the officials who undertake to punish the laborers' strikes and the rebellion of their allies. The reactionary Slav is brutal, but he has the fine sensibility of a race in which many princes have become nihilists. He raises the lash with facility, but then he repents and oftentimes weeps. I have seen Russian officials kill themselves rather than march against the people, or through remorse for slaughter committed. The German in the service of the Czar feels no scruples, nor laments his conduct. He kills coldly, with the minuteness and exactitude with which he does everything. The Russian is a barbarian who strikes and regrets. German civilization shoots without hesitation. Our Slav Czar, in a humanitarian dream, favored the utopian idea of universal peace, organizing the Conference of the Hague. The Kaiser of culture, meanwhile, has been working years and years in the erection and establishment of a destructive organ of an immensity heretofore unknown, in order to crush all Europe. The Russian is a humble Christian, socialistic, democratic, thirsting for justice. The German prides himself upon his Christianity, but is an idolater like the German of other centuries. His religion loves blood and maintains castes. His true worship is that of Odin, only that nowadays the god of slaughter has changed his name and calls himself the State. Tchernoff paused an instant, perhaps in order to increase the wonder of his companions, and then said with simplicity, "I am a Christian." Argensola, who already knew the ideas and history of the Russian, started with astonishment, and Julio persisted in his suspicion. "Surely Tchernoff is drunk." "It is true," declared the Russian earnestly, "that I do not worry about God, nor do I believe in dogmas. But my soul is Christian, as is that of all revolutionists. The philosophy of modern democracy is lay Christianity. We socialists love the humble, the needy, the weak. We defend their right to life and well-being, as did the greatest lights of the religious world who saw a brother in every unfortunate. We exact respect for the poor in the name of justice, and others ask for it in the name of charity. That only separates us. But we strive that mankind may, by common consent, lead a better life, that the strong may sacrifice for the weak, the lofty for the lowly, and the world be ruled by brotherliness, seeking the greatest equality possible." The Slav reviewed the history of human aspirations. Greek thought had brought comfort, a sense of well-being on the earth, but only for the few, for the citizens of the little democracies, for the free men, leaving the slaves and barbarians who constituted the majority in their misery. Christianity, the religion of the lowly, had recognized the right of happiness for all mankind, but this happiness was placed in heaven, far from this world, this vale of tears. The revolution and its heirs, the socialists, were trying to place happiness in the immediate realities of earth, like the ancients, but making all humanity participants in it, like the Christians. Where is the Christianity of modern Germany? There is far more genuine Christian spirit in the fraternal laity of the French Republic, defender of the weak, than in the religiosity of the conservative Junkers. Germany has made a god in her own image, believing that she adores it, but in reality adoring her own image. The German god is a reflex of the German state, which considers war as the first activity of a nation and the noblest of occupations. Other Christian peoples, when they have to go to war, feel the contradiction that exists between their conduct and the teachings of the gospel, and excuse themselves by showing the cruel necessity which impels them. Germany declares that war is acceptable to God. I have heard German sermons proving that Jesus was in favor of militarism. Teutonic pride and the conviction that its race is providentially destined to dominate the world brings into working unity their Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. Far above their differences of dogma is that God of the state which is German, the warrior God to whom William is probably referring as my worthy ally. Religions always tend toward universality. Their aim is to place humanity in relationship with God and to sustain these relations among mankind. Prussia has retrograded to barbarism, creating for its personal use a second Jehovah, a divinity hostile to the greater part of the human race, who makes his own the grudges and ambitions of the German people. Tchernoff then explained in his own way the creation of this Teutonic god, ambitious, cruel, and vengeful. The Germans were comparatively recent Christians. Their Christianity was not more than 6 centuries old. When the Crusades were drawing to a close, the Prussians were still living in paganism. Pride of race, impelling them to war, had revived these dead divinities. The God of the Gospel was now adorned by the Germans with lance and shield, like the old Teutonic god, who was a military chief. Christianity in Berlin wears helmet and riding boots. God at this moment is seeing himself mobilized, the same as Otto, Fritz, and Franz, in order to punish the enemies of his chosen people. That the Lord has commanded, "Thou shalt not kill," and his Son has said to the world, "Blessed are the peacemakers," no longer matters. Christianity, according to its German priests of all creeds, can only influence the individual betterment of mankind and should not mix itself in affairs of state. The Prussian god of the state is the old German god, the lineal descendant of the ferocious Germanic mythology, a mixture of divinities hungry for war. In the silence of the avenue, the Russian evoked the ruddy figures of the implacable gods that were going to awake that night upon hearing the hum of arms and smelling the acrid odor of blood. Thor, the brutal god with the little head, was stretching his biceps and clutching the hammer that crushed cities. Wotan was sharpening his lance, which had the lightning for its handle, the thunder for its blade. Odin, the one-eyed, was gaping with gluttony on the mountain tops, awaiting the dead warriors that would crowd around his throne. The disheveled Valkyries, fat and perspiring, were beginning to gallop from cloud to cloud, hallooing to humanity that they might carry off the corpses, doubled like saddlebags, over the haunches of their flying nags. German religiosity, continued the Russian, is the disavowal of Christianity. In its eyes, men are no longer equal before God. Their God is interested only in the strong and favors them with his support so that they may dare anything. Those born weak must either submit or disappear. Neither are nations equal, but are divided into leaders and inferior races whose destiny is to be sifted out and absorbed by their superiors. Since God has thus ordained, it is unnecessary to state that the grand world leader is Germany. Argensola here interrupted to observe that German pride believed itself championed not only by God but by science too. "I know that," interposed the Russian without letting him finish. "Generalization, inequality, selection, the struggle for life, and all that. The Germans, so conceited about their special worth, erect upon distant ground their intellectual monuments, borrowing of the foreigner their foundation material whenever they undertake a new line of work. A Frenchman and an Englishman, Gobineau and Chamberlain, have given them the arguments with which to defend the superiority of their race. With the rubbish left over from Darwin and Spencer, their old Haeckel has built up his doctrine of monism, which applied to politics scientifically consecrates Prussian pride and recognizes its right to rule the world by force. No, 1,000 times no!" he exclaimed after a brief silence. "The struggle for existence with its procession of cruelties may be true among the lower species, but it should not be true among human creatures. We are rational beings and ought to free ourselves from the fatality of environment, molding it to our convenience. The animal does not know law, justice or compassion. He lives enslaved in the obscurity of his instincts. We think, and thought signifies liberty. Force does not necessarily have to be cruel. It is strongest when it does not take advantage of its power and is kindly. All have a right to the life into which they are born. And since among individuals there exist the haughty and the humble, the mighty and the weak, so should exist nations, large and small, old and young. The end of our existence is not combat, nor killing in order that others may afterwards kill us and perhaps be killed themselves. Civilized people ought unanimously to adopt the idea of Southern Europe, striving for the most peaceful and sweetest form of life possible." A cruel smile played over the Russian's beard. "But there exists that Kultur, diametrically opposed to civilization, which the Germans wish to palm off upon us. Civilization is refinement of spirit, respect of one's neighbor, tolerance of foreign opinion, courtesy of manner. Kultur is the action of a state that organizes and assimilates individuals and communities in order to utilize them for its own ends, and these ends consist mainly in placing the state above other states, overwhelming them with their grandeur, or what is the same thing, with their haughty and violent pride." End of Section 24. Recording by Tony Oliva, Albuquerque, New Mexico.